Hi, everyone. Welcome to the BIM Services Podcast. My name is Chad Smeltzer, and I am your host. In this episode, I'm joined by Nick Miller and Jonathan Swafford to discuss Building Information Modeling, or BIM. Our conversations will cover various aspects of BIM, including its potential for cost savings and increased efficiency by identifying and resolving design clashes before construction even begins. Looking ahead, the future of BIM holds exciting possibilities, such as the integration of AI and generative design, as well as a strong emphasis on data connectivity and transformation. At USCAD, we provide construction and design technology solutions that empower passionate and growth-seeking AEC professionals to explore innovative ways of building and designing our world. Thank you for tuning in, and we should be sure to follow and subscribe to our channel for more insightful episodes. Today, we are going to be talking about building information modeling with Jonathan Swafford and Nick Miller. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Now, Jonathan, you've been working at USCAD for how long? Can you give us an introduction about yourself and what you do there?
Sure, yeah, I've been with USCAD for just over 2 years. I've been in the industry for about 12 years. And I'm a BIM consultant here. So I work with our clients as well as our production teams to help build out scope of work and make sure that our team is delivering on the promises we make.
Love it. Nick, what are you doing at USCAD?
Thanks, Chad. Nick Miller, Director of BIM Services here at USCAD. So I help oversee the department that aligns with clients to help them get projects done, and much like Jonathan does, help scope out and develop project deliverable requirements.
Love it. Appreciate you guys both being here because this is exciting. Building information modeling is one of these unique tools that we have now in our digital transformation that's happening in our civil infrastructure industry. And one of the things that I want to talk about in simple terms, what is BIM and how important is it to the infrastructure industry? Jonathan, you want to start off?
Sure, yeah. BIM is basically this idea that we want to get more information up front so that we can do a better job when we actually are in the field. So we take that data and put it into the model itself and make sure that the information that the construction team or the field team needs is right there.
Awesome. Nick?
Yeah, I think to expand upon that, I think it's also heavily focused on taking the 2D process that we've used historically and creating a 3D representation of that building to understand space, dimension, design. Are those things all going to work together, right? Because there's nothing worse than getting into the middle of a project and realizing what was designed is not going to work as designed. So as many of those things that we can solve up front, the better the construction process will go overall.
Yeah, I can imagine it's a very helpful tool. Speaking of tools, so how would someone generate information about a building? What tools would be required? Which one of you want to attack that first?
Yeah, there's lots of different tools out there. You typically are starting with a 3D modeling application, something like Revit. There's other alternatives available, obviously, but it's essentially using an application that is potentially database oriented and allowing you to build complex, geometrically accurate models that represent the real world spaces. And really allow you to go a layer deeper in terms of the understanding of what's being designed, what's being applied, and how those things all connect and fit together.
Got it. Jonathan, you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, that's it, right? With the idea that we can have these tools to bring additional data from all the different disciplines and all the different engineering firms together in one place and have a seamless exchange is what it's all about.
Great. So if I understand this correctly, there's to get a building information modeling going, you have to have some type of laser scanning, correct, of inside the building first. Is that how it works?
You can absolutely, if you're working on an existing space and you need to generate an understanding, an as-built model of that space, then laser scanning is absolutely one of the ways that you can accomplish that. That's going to give you a really detailed understanding of everything that's in that space that's visible. There are technologies out there that you can use to see behind walls and through concrete as well. But for the most part, a lot of our clients are kind of starting with that laser scanning process and then using that to develop an as-built existing conditions model that they can then either use as the basis of design or use to clash their design models against. Alternatively, if it's new construction, then we can actually generate a model from the 2D design plans that are generated on the project. Or, if you're working with a more advanced firm, they may actually be designing in 3D and using those tools right up front to generate those models as part of their design process.
Got it. So there's basically two ways of getting it. You either have a model that's already built and you're kind of adding on to it, it sounds like, or if you have new construction, it might already be developed in 2D, 3D, and you don't really have to do the laser scanning. What I'm curious about it though is like if someone wants to remodel a building, right, and they want to go in and do all this remodeling work, but they don't know where all the pipes run and things like that. Would it be helpful to scan it through like, is there a tool to scan that to get that BIM kind of developed for them? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can use terrestrial scanners to go out and create a point cloud of a facility. You also have technologies like GPR, ground penetrating radar, that will actually capture information directly from the walls, from the what's in the walls from a rebar standpoint, as well as piping. It's limited to a degree, but it gets you a really good understanding of where things are, and you can use that as kind of an overlay to start building out your model and your as builds. And sometimes that's done in 2D, and then later on upgraded to 3D. Sometimes it starts out right off the bat in 3D. Just really depends on the situation.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Nick, did you have anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is typically owner driven, right? How well have they kept track of the building documentation from previous builds? And that kind of really dictates the strategy. We do have clients that basically manage their buildings from 3D models today. So that kind of future vision is actually happening, and people do that in the digital twin space. But we do work with lots of clients today who have 2D plans and specs of their spaces, and it doesn't really give them an informed understanding of what's going on inside those buildings, as well as maybe a 3D model would.
That's right. Yeah, and we have been seeing an uptick in the owners wanting that as a deliverable for facility management purposes. We have a client right now that they're just used to doing it in 2D, and they're having us upgrade that information to a 3D model for delivery to the owner.
Okay.
So it just really depends on the situation.
Interesting. Yeah. So if once they've got all the information about their building and it's kind of sitting there, how would someone manage that information? I'd imagine a software system like USCADs would help.
Yeah. There's lots of platforms available today that allow you to manage that. Different companies develop different strategies. There are different software solutions out there geared towards either facilities management. There's some applications that are space management and space planning tools. Some of them allow you to look at all of those things more holistically and kind of have a more broad understanding of what are all the rentable spaces in my facility? What are all the digital assets in that facility? How do we allocate the resources within that facility? So depending on the tools you're using, kind of dictates how far and wide you can go with that. But again, without that model being a deliverable to you at the end of the project, it really limits what you can do with that data in the first place and the effort required to collect it.
Makes sense. Jonathan, you want to add?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing a lot of times is trying to make the data as usable as possible is super important. So there's different softwares out there, and a lot of times the delivery of that is just a URL, right? It's a web address of here is your facility, and you can go into that and you can click on the different parts of the facility and navigate around it as you would any website. And that's really important for the facility management team that's out in the field and have it just a phone and they don't have specialized software. And it's really important for the owners who maybe don't have this really sophisticated software on their computers, and they just want to be able to open up their facility, see what's happening, and plan out their next steps of that facility. So it's going to be very much dictated on how it's going to be leveraged, but that's the end result, is to make it super easy. But just like with anything, in order to make it super easy, you have to have all the data, the technology behind that to make it feel super easy, right? You don't go to google.com and type in something and it just magically happens. There's a lot of stuff going on back behind the scenes that makes that super seamless.
I'm glad you said that, because the next question is, what's the challenges and obstacles that infrastructure professionals commonly encounter when they're implementing a BIM, system, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I typically it's the first challenge is obviously where do we start,
Yeah.
right? Where do we get started? What's the first step? How do we kind of take that next step into that process? And that depends on client to client. How do you do things today? That's one of the things we are very focused on, is kind of helping meet our clients where they're at in their journey, and then take whatever next steps are applicable to them.
Yeah.
Because that you can meet two firms that are using the same tools, and their thought on how they get to that next phase can be very, very different. The other part is, how do you balance that movement or that change within your organization while also trying to figure out how you're going to do all the projects that you have going on, right? And I think that really becomes the problem, is we have to continue to meet the requirements of the existing projects and then attempt to tackle something new that we've never done before. So we do have some clients that maybe say, hey, we're going to have a third party organization like USCAD or another firm come alongside and maybe help us on the first one. So that way we don't have to be responsible for learning new technology and trying to develop these new skills while also doing that against a deadline that we're trying to hit. So it really gives kind of the best of both worlds. They can see how it's done successfully without putting the pressure of their team in-house to figure out how they're going to do it. And then obviously they can kind of figure out, okay, how do we take the steps appropriate or necessary to take that journey internally and do those things ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what Nick's talking about here is feasibility, right? It's feasibility to pay for the project, but also feasibility to implement it into your organization's workflows, because it's not easy, right? It's not easy to take a new technology or a new workflow and say, okay, we're just going to switch to this overnight, right? Yeah. It doesn't work like that. I mean, USCAD has an entire division of people dedicated to building out standards and helping with template creation and ensuring training and workflow processes are where they need to be before it even gets to that implementation process. But meanwhile, while you're trying to get to that point, you need someone that you can partner with and say, hey, we've got projects today. We have stuff going on right now that we need someone to come in and help support these efforts and make sure that we're doing it right. So that way we continue to get those owners coming back to us, those municipals, those different groups coming back to us for that deliverable.
Yeah, I think one of our clients said it best when they said, I spend all day doing things that are urgent and I never do anything that's important. And this can be one of those situations where, you're trying to meet the next deadline, but you're not actually advancing your organization in any capacity, which is the important thing that you need to do, simply because you're always up against the next deadline, right? So It's kind of balancing those two worlds of how do we do things that fundamentally help our business grow, but also, continue to meet the requirements of our day-to-day jobs.
Makes a lot of sense. Now, just to kind of get the audience kind of understanding, what are the infrastructure professionals doing now if they didn't have BIM?
Yeah. So today, a lot of it just happens in 2D. So
Okay.
It's a very antiquated process. The primary deliverables to the contractor for them to bid off of are 2D plan sets. So it's PDFs, it's pieces of paper. And then they're actually kind of manually going through the process of figuring out, okay, here's where all the problems are, here's the challenges that we see. Unfortunately, a lot of the times you don't kind of realize those until you're in the throes of it, and you got to stop and say, hey, time out, this is not right. A lot of value engineering happens on those projects as well. We are starting to see a scenario where we've got some more complex wastewater treatment plants and facilities that are requiring a little bit more heavy industrial piping, are starting to use Revit and understand the benefits of how do we make sure that all of our penetrations are in the right spot and our sleeves are coordinated correctly as we're kind of cutting through all these different buildings. So that 3D process can really give you a deeper understanding of how things connect and where they tie in together. But to your point, a lot of that today happens in PDFs and 2D plan sets in a very old school process.
Yeah, and there's a big push to move to this digital deliverable. We keep hearing this over and over again in the industry, digital deliverable. And, I think it's going to be it's going from, a digital deliverable meaning delivering PDF drawings to it's going to be very quickly meaning So let's think about what that end is and keep that in mind at the beginning of the project. That's what BIM's really all about, right? Is keeping the designing and producing with the end in mind. And what is that digital deliver going to be, and how functional is it going to be? And so I think we're going to see a very fast ramp up here to organizations wanting to adopt a process that gives a higher level deliverable at the end of it, especially when you start talking about analysis, right? When you start talking about trying to identify, how energy efficient is this? How all this data that we want to pull out of this is very difficult to do if you don't have that at the end of the project to pull that from.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest benefits for the infrastructure team is because they're slow to adopt and move. A lot of the road has been paved, right? We don't have to kind of branch out and test what's going to work and try to figure out what technology is going to fit the bill. That's all really been defined. So kind of, it's one of the advantages of kind of being more measured in your approach is it's far less risky in terms of the path you can take, because you can kind of take a path that's been vetted significantly more by other industries and people kind of running through that process significantly.
Yeah, and the tools are there. Because of that, the tools are there, right? You have organizations like Autodesk developing, the next generation of tools and perfecting and ensuring that the current generation tools are the very best possible. So stepping in, the threshold of using that technology, it's already where it needs to be. And leveraging, things like Civil 3D or Revit are at a place now that they don't have to worry or wait for it to catch up, because we're there, we're where we need to be. Is there some additional, features and tools that could come out? Sure, and we're always looking for those and always wanting more. But you don't have to wait for the tools to be built out, because companies like Autodesk has already done that for us.
Just a curious question. You guys are talking about the 2D and PDFs and things like that. What percentage of the industry is still using that model, that 2D model?
I think a lot.
Really?
I think it's, probably 60% or greater,
Oof.
maybe even 70. It might be regional, honestly. I would expect you'd see, I'm here in the Midwest. I would guess we're a little bit further behind that curve. If you get out to the coasts, I would guess they're a little bit more ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
So some of that is probably dictated by regionality, but I know that in our area, they still require 2 Mylar copies to be submitted as part of the process. So it is definitely an antiquated process that can use an update overall. But again, some of that may be dictated simply by the states and kind of the approach that they want to take within their jurisdiction.
Wow. First thing that comes to my mind is the cost. Sorry, Jonathan. I mean, that's crazy. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I was just going to, and the type of projects too, right? You start getting into government projects, or you start getting into manufacturing, large, chip manufacturing facilities. You're going to have more of an emphasis on using newer technologies and trying to have a better and more holistic view of the project. And that's where, BIM really comes in and highlights. But for some of those smaller projects or more regional projects, you're going to have less of an emphasis on it. And they're just really trying to get out there, get the project done and do what has to be done in the immediate future and what's required by, like Nick said, the local governmental agencies.
Yeah. Can you guys speak to a little bit more about the cost savings and efficiency for implementing this model, the 3D?
Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of a hard scenario to say here's the actual cost savings on a project by project basis. You have to get very detailed and in the weeds in terms of how companies do things to show those savings. Yeah. But at a really high level, the industry average today is about $5,000 for every RFI that's generated, regardless of what the impact on the project is. So you got people stopping work, you got forms being submitted, you got to wait, there's a review process, documentation goes back and forth, decisions are made, and then something happens. So every time we can do something in 3D, find a clash, find a collision, find a problem, and solve it before anyone breaks ground, you're saving that RFI process, the costs associated with it, the work stoppages that happen when you find those things in the field in the real time. So, we typically start a project. We run the first round of clash detection. It's typically segmented by areas in the building. And, we're finding hundreds and hundreds of clashes in that first round. So it's truly kind of solving the vast majority of the problems as designed right up front, and just eliminating this process of getting out in the field and going, hey, that beam height doesn't make sense now that we're pouring the concrete. We're going to have an issue here. Finding that 4 months earlier before you've ever broke ground on the project is a significantly faster and more cost-effective way to deal with that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what you'll see too is that's the process, that's the ideology that's being taught now in the universities, as taking more of a holistic view of the project rather than just focusing on the design or just focusing on my portion of it, but really considering the entire project. That's why every designer, every engineer, every architect that comes out of university is going to have a high level of understanding and knowledge of Revit, of the Civil 3D tools, because they're looking at it more holistically than maybe what we had done earlier on, because we didn't have the amount of visibility that we can have today within the project. So you kind of were forced to leverage RFIs to resolve those issues, because you didn't have the same visibility as you might be able to now, leveraging a BIM type approach.
That's interesting what you just said there, because the kids coming out of college are using this technology right away, and you still have the established old way of doing things. And I can imagine there's got to be a clash somewhere in there. I'm like, go ahead.
It's not as much as you might think.
Okay.
Actually, most of the principals I've talked to, they get excited when they're able to grab somebody new that has this knowledge, because they know that they don't have the same level. It's hard to make adjustments when you've been doing something the same way for the last 25, 35 years. It's difficult to make those adjustments. So when they are able to hire somebody that has that level of knowledge, they're asking them. They're becoming more of a thought leader very early on in their careers, because of this knowledge base. And that's what we try also to bring to the table. We have been brought in more than one time saying, the new guy says we need to be doing this. And we started looking at it, and he started explaining it, and we're like, oh, holy crap, like we're missing the boat here. And we get brought in and said, okay, well, let's help you build out your standards and your templates, and make sure that your team that's been established for a while has the training they need, so they can continue to improve on this process. But from what I've seen, at least, there's not really a lot of pushback. It's more of an excitement of, great, now we have somebody who already understands this, and we can task this person with bringing us up to speed on this.
Yeah, and the firms that aren't embracing it, unfortunately, run the risk of their kind of newer talent coming out and going, okay, I want to do something more exciting, right? We're not leveraging the technology that I want to see. On the construction side, we're actually seeing a lot of success with taking kind of the classic, vintage guy who's been on site, the foreman, the superintendent who's been there forever, and just partnering the new guy out of college with him and making that guy responsible, or that gal, I don't want to be offensive there, tasking that person with being responsible for the button clicking, right? Go push the buttons, go click on the computer, go submit the things, go do all that digital stuff. And then your job is to be a sponge and learn as much as you can from this gentleman or this person who's been on site doing this for 40 years, because we want to get as much tribal knowledge as they have into the younger generation, but then also facilitate some of the advanced processes that we're seeing through technology that maybe some of the senior staff is not excited about.
That makes
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I
would say it's the same, it's the same process really that we had when AutoCAD really entered the market, right? We went from everything being done by hand to now you have this new generation wanting to leverage computers and do 2D drawings through that. And there was a little bit of a rift at first, but then very quickly you saw people saying, okay, no, this is the way of doing things. We're going through the same change, and we have gone through that change in a lot of the commercial and even some of the residential projects, and now it's coming over into the infrastructure and government, areas. And so, just as Nick was saying, like you're going to need that tribal knowledge. You're going to need those people. I mean, that is unteachable in college. You have to have those people in those organizations to help raise up that next generation, and then the next generation brings a lot to the table when it comes to a technological advantage.
It makes a lot of sense what you guys are talking about, pairing someone that's been in the industry 30, 40 years with a younger, more technology savvy person, because the first thing that anybody wants to do, learn a new software, learn a new technology when they've been doing it the same way for 30, 40 years, right?
Yeah.
So I love the way you guys describe that. That makes a ton of sense to put those two together and make that happen, because it makes it easier, it seems like, in my mind. But it's kind of like, my next question was going to be like integrating the best practices for a BIM for planning design. What's that look like?
Yeah, that is always kind of the big question, is how do we, again, what are the first steps we take? How do we implement this?
Yeah.
What do we bring into the fold? And what are the right solutions for us to look at? Again, I think that's a firm by firm approach. It is a matter of consulting with the client to determine what makes the most sense for them.
Yeah.
But for the most part, right, it starts with a desire. Hey, we want to make this change. Can you help us? And then once we've identified that, we have some processes that we go through to help them decide what the right next steps are.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Baby steps. It's all about baby steps, right? It's that old movie, Baby Steps into the Elevator. You have to start at the beginning, as silly as that sounds, but it does really start with that desire to look at what BIM offers, what the new technologies offer, and implement those in a smart way. And sometimes it doesn't mean going all the way to 100. Right out of the gate, right? Maybe it means only implementing certain parts of it, or implementing it on certain types of projects. We see that a tremendous amount. Is that we use AutoCAD for most of our projects, but these 4 projects that we're working on right now, we're using BIM because it makes a lot more sense. They're larger projects. There's a lot more going on, and that makes a lot more sense. So sometimes it just starts with a few projects, and then as time goes on, what we see is they start wanting to do it on every single project.
Yeah, makes sense. Once you start getting used to using something and you've got over that hurdle, then you can keep moving forward. Go ahead.
It's like switching from a hammer and nails to an automatic nailer. It's like, how did we ever do this before? What in the
Great
world were we
analogy.
thinking? Right? It's just a massive improvement in your process. But again, you have to kind of see that in action before you understand the benefit.
So we got 3 more minutes, guys. I want each of you to talk about, what's the future of BIM look like? Go ahead, John.
Okay. I think what everybody's most excited about is the advantages of AI and generative design, but it's also what everybody's most scared about, right? Because one, it's scary to turn over the structural design of a facility to maybe a technology that isn't fully proven. So there's going to be a bit of checks and balances that are going to have to be put in place. And you're seeing companies like Autodesk, this year at AU, talking about AI and how they're implementing it within their workflows and in their technologies, so that people can start playing with them and testing them out. And you're going to see some of the organizations that are a little more future, thought, start playing with them and leveraging them, and that will only get better and better over time. And Nick and I constantly talk about how we're going to leverage AI within our organization and our own workflows, and how it's going to be, one of those things that if you don't know AI in 15 years, you're not going to be able to do your job really very effectively. So I think that's what I'm most excited about, is to see how the generative design workflow and the tools that come out are implemented in the real world. Because you can easily say, oh, yeah, this is great. It does this, it does that. But when you get in the real world, we all know it's not as clean and it's not as simple as that. So I'm interested to see how that works and hear some stories about what organizations are doing.
Love it. Nick?
I think the future of BIM, what we're seeing now is the tools, I think, are getting to a point where they're sophisticated enough that clients can do everything that they need to within the tools that they have. I think what we're starting to see now is this idea of a refocus or a shift in focus on data connectivity and data transformation. And it's like, okay, now I have all of these massive data sets. What do I do with them? How do I leverage them? How do I get system A to talk to system B so that at the end of the project, I can have a model and have it feed out all these different tools or using. So I think that's really where the focus is going to start shifting to, is this idea of how do I better leverage the data that I'm receiving. Some of that is obviously industry specific based on how far they are in their BIM journey. But for the most part, I think that future of BIM is now, how do I get the most out of it and leverage it? How do I manage my building from it? How do I have IoT sensors in that facility that inform my facilities people in real time where they need to focus, what's happening, what's next? I think that's really kind of the exciting future part that we're starting to see. It's like this real world application of how do we take this data and leverage it on a day-to-day basis.
I love it, man. You just gave us the next episode where we talk about AI, IoT, and BIM all together. I think that's what we can talk about next time. But unfortunately, we're out of time today. So I truly thank you both for joining me on this podcast. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to having you guys back for the next one.
Hey, thank you so much. We appreciate you having us.
Yeah. You guys have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you on the next podcast.